Well, thanks a lot, Bob. And yeah, I am glad to be here. I'm sorry I don't recognize everybody's face along with their name, but I don't see you folks often enough. But it's a pleasure to be here. And what I'm going to do, and those of you who've heard me before know what I do, I just stand up and ramble on until I see people getting restless, and then I stop. But I will leave enough time at the end for anybody to ask questions, preferably about cars. And here we go. I started at Standard Triumph in August of 1958, so I'm 4 years past, or almost 4 years past my 50th anniversary in the British car business. Before I moved to New York, I was in Cincinnati, Ohio, and I had a succession of foreign cars. My first one was a Humber Hawk. I don't know how many of you have ever encountered a Humber, let alone a Humber Hawk. The Hawk, actually, although it sounds like a good name, was the lower priced model. The high-class Humber is known as the Super Snipe. Now, if you know anything about a snipe and have been to scout camp, you know that there's always a snipe hunt and nobody ever catches a snipe. Well, Humber snipes were easy to catch. Hawks were even easier because they were usually parked. Anyway, my first thing about British cars is always that people didn't buy them necessarily for the looks. They didn't buy them necessarily for the performance, certainly not for the comfort. They bought them because of that smell. Now, I tell you, when I went to look at the Humber Hawk, this was going to be my college graduation present, and I looked at it at Jake Sweeney's Ford dealership in Cincinnati. And it's a nice little boxy four-door sedan. But you open the door and there is this expanse of leather. And the smell comes wafting out. So that when you go out on the test drive, it even overpowers the exhaust smell coming from underneath. And the fact that the car is bouncing up and down because the shocks are shot and the rear sway bar is broken, etc., etc., etc. But I've always felt that you open the door to a British car, a new British car particularly, and it hits you. And it's intoxicating, unfortunately. So, 35 years ago, this is the 35th anniversary. 35 years ago was 1977. And in 1977, Triumph cars were being sold by the British Leyland Motor Corporation worldwide and by British Leyland Motors Inc. over here. And you think about it, 1977 was the year after the TR6 went out of production. 1977 was the year that the TR7 finally got a decent transmission. 5-speed gearbox came in. But we were still 2 years before the TR7 convertible. So what did we have for sale at British Leyland? We had TR7 coupes and TR7 coupes and TR7 coupes, and all the way over to there we had Spitfires, we had MGBs, we had some leftover Land Rovers. It was kind of a polyglot thing. But Triumph was a little bit shortchanged until the TR7 convertible came along. Anyway, 1977, we were still in the height of the sports car craze. Now, I don't know, how many people here were driving a Triumph in 1977? That's a pretty good group. I gotta watch myself what I say. Well, I was still driving a TR6 because I refused to give up my TR6 company car until they gave the TR7 a gearbox that anybody could sensibly use. So, anyway, I turned in my company car at something like 16,000 miles when the maximum limit was 5,000. So I think, you know, this club, the Delaware Valley Club, has done very well to survive and pull out this many people for an anniversary celebration, and I congratulate you all for that. Now, if I go back a little bit further to my first Triumph, imagine what it was like to be in Cincinnati in 1957 driving a Triumph. It didn't matter what party you were at or who you were talking to. You'd say what you were driving, and the instant answer was, a what? Is that one of them MGs? No. Well, the 1954 TR2 that was titled a 55 could actually out-accelerate an Olds 88. I proved it a number of times. And one day I came up to a traffic light in a fairly urban area of Cincinnati near a shopping center, and a Plymouth pulled up next to me. Well, I knew I could out-drag a Plymouth. When the light changed, I floored it and took off. As I shifted out of second into third, I looked to my left expecting to see the nose of the Plymouth going this way. Instead, I saw the trunk of the Plymouth going that way, and the word Fury on the side of the car. The Fury disappeared over the next hill, and behind me is a red light. 1953 Chevrolet, you know, red light. Stopped me, license, registration. I said, what about him? He said, you want to be ticketed for speeding or racing? Oh, okay. And we went down to court the following week, and there was a string of people who had been doing 55 and a 35, and they were all getting, you know, $50 fine in next case. I got up there, the officer said, defendant was driving a 1955 Triumph. The judge said, a what? And it was $50 and a week's suspension. One of them sports cars, Your Honor. Oh boy. You know. But that's what it was like. You know, it didn't matter whether it was a T-Series MG with spidery wire wheels and no horsepower or whatever. It was one of them sports cars, and the driver was obviously dangerous. And that's what it was like for a long time. I came to Triumph on Broadway in August of 1958. Broadway in the upper 50s was Automobile Row. Well, probably a number of you have memories of being in New York at that time. But on our block, we were on the corner of 56th and Broadway. The Triumph showroom was downstairs. The executive offices were upstairs. Next to us, there was a Fiat dealership. There was a Borgward dealership. Then there was a Buick dealership. Across the road, they sold Gogo-mobiles. Up the road, more GM. Around the corner on 57th Street was British Motor Corporation with Healey's and MGs and Morris and so forth, and Jaguar was just a little further east on 57th. There was even, when I first came to New York, still a Packard showroom on Broadway at about 60th or 61st Street, 1958, the last year. So it was, you were in an automobile atmosphere. And it was, you know, nowadays, when you're driving a Triumph, it still feels like an exciting car, like an interesting car. In those days, all cars were interesting. Nowadays, I mean, my Jeep, I love it. It's great. It's utilitarian and so forth, and it might as well be a refrigerator. It's not an enthusiast car. My Spitfire, if I could get into it, is more like it. So we were really involved in those days, and even if you worked for the company, you were involved. It wasn't just a job. Maybe the accounting department came to work and went home without being enthusiastic, but the rest of us sure didn't. I started out as assistant advertising manager and as in charge of the Triumph Sports Owners Association. I was already a member from having had my TR2. And I had actually called on the PR agency that was doing the TSOA before I did. Some of you have, and I was talking to Al Strajewski about this. Some of you have the old, early TSOA newsletters that were mimeographed or printed on individual sheets. And those were put out by a guy named Paul Thurston, who had offices over in Rockefeller Center. When I first came to New York, I brought my sales bag. I was selling lapel pins. And I called on Paul Thurston and tried to sell him Triumph Sports Owners Association lapel pins. Unfortunately, they were getting them free from England. That didn't work out, but I wrote a letter of application. And when I came to New York a year or so later, I got a job at an ad agency, and 6 months later got a call from Triumph. They kept the letter. So I ended up there, as I say, August of '58. We got involved in the ads that have been flipping through here. You'll see one, there's a TR4 number 62 on a track. Driver is me. We did everything on a budget. We used secretaries in the office for models and cars. All the guys participated at one time or another. And that ad with the TR4, somebody had decided that, and this was very early on, obviously, in the car's life, that we had to show that it was a capable race car. And we had to take the picture now because it was November and it was going to snow. So they called me at, I don't know, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, said, we got this shoot scheduled tomorrow at Yonkers Raceway. I said, it's a horse track. Never mind. Never mind. So you'll see in the picture that I'm wearing what looks like a driver's suit. It's somebody's Triumph jacket that had one of these stand-up collars zipped up all the way to the top. The helmet belongs to a guy who rode a scooter to work. The numbers were all provided by the ad agency. They're cut out of construction paper and taped on with clear plastic tape. There's no problem to take the windshield off. And I went digging in the back of a closet because I just knew that somewhere I had seen a Brooklands racing screen. And by golly, it was there. So we took the windshield off, we put the racing screen on. The car was white, so we attached it with white tape. Easy retouch. And then, what about the roll bar? Round the corner to Strauss Auto, and I bought 8 or 9 feet of flex pipe. Bend it into the shape of a roll bar, move the seats back, and there you have it, a roll bar. A little retouching, when you see the ad, it's perfect, right? So we got involved in a lot of stuff like that.